Have you ever heard of a man who terrified an entire region? So much that people literally forgot what sleep felt like? The man in today's case was nicknamed the Boogeyman. Not just a monster to frighten children, he plunged whole towns into waking fear. Our story begins in New Brunswick, Canada, along the Miramichi River. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Doors were left unlocked, car keys hung in ignitions, and safety felt like a given. But in 1989, that sense of safety was shattered by a sequence of crimes so brutal that the entire region changed its habits overnight. On Sunday, May 28th, 1989, two elderly sisters, Annie and Nina, finished a long day at the small general store attached to their home. Annie had run that shop for about 50 years, and the sisters were well known to nearly everyone. Around 11 p.m., they locked up, stepped into their living quarters, and each went to her room, one to read, the other to settle in for the night. Hours later, a neighbor walking home in the quiet streets saw flames exploding from the upper floor. He sprinted to call the fire department. Firefighters arrived fast, smashed the door, and pushed up the smoke-filled stairs. Near the staircase, they found Nina, collapsed and badly burned, as if she'd been crawling for the exit before losing consciousness in the toxic smoke. They carried her out. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital. Inside a bedroom, they found Annie. She had not survived. The blaze had taken her life. At the hospital, doctors saw something that changed the course of the investigation. Nina was not only burned, her body showed severe bruising, blunt force trauma, and fractures. Someone had beaten her before the fire. That meant this wasn't a tragic accident. It was a crime scene. Police notified the fire examiner and secured the house. Investigators determined the blaze was deliberately set. This was arson. Detectives combed through the charred interior for anything usable. Despite the destruction, they found two crucial items: a strand of hair that did not belong to either sister, and, later, a cigarette filter discarded in the house. Both were preserved as evidence. When Nina finally regained consciousness, detectives came to her bedside and asked her to recount the night. She told them. After closing the shop at around 11, the sisters entered their home and went to their separate rooms. Soon after, she sensed someone moving inside the house. Footsteps on the stairs. When she stepped out to check, a man lunged at her and beat her viciously, then tied her hands and left her bound. He proceeded to Annie's room, where he beat and bound Annie as well, and sexually assaulted her. After restraining them both, he set the house on fire. Nina, through sheer will, managed to wrench free of the cloth binding her wrists, but the flames and smoke overtook her as she crawled toward the stairs. She blacked out by the staircase. Annie never escaped. By morning, the news roared through every home on the Miramichi. A quiet, trusting region, where people used to sleep with doors unlocked, was now wide awake and terrified. And they had reason. The killer had shown careful cruelty, sexual violence, and a willingness to burn his victims alive to erase evidence. Detectives quickly focused on two known violent offenders in the region. One stood out above all, a recent prison escapee, Allan Legere, whose name was already tied to bloodshed. In 1986, Legere, then 38, and two accomplices had invaded the home of an elderly couple who ran a small store, savagely beat them, and killed them. The three were caught and sent to Atlantic Institution. On May 3, 1989, just weeks before the sisters' house burned, Legere was escorted from prison to a hospital for an ear infection. He was handcuffed, shackled, and belted. Inside, he asked to use the restroom. There, he produced a hidden key, slipped his restraints, shoved the guard, bolted through the corridors, and in the parking area hijacked a woman at knife point, forcing her to drive. He later abandoned her unharmed but disappeared into the grid of streets, and then the woods. 25 days later, the sisters' home was in flames, and Annie was dead. The timeline and brutality made Legere the prime suspect. Public fear became pressure. People demanded updates, suspects, arrests, assurance. Detectives broadened the hunt. They also detained another known criminal and ruled him out. That left Legere in the center of the crosshairs. Weeks passed without an arrest. Some residents hoped the killer had fled the Miramichi for good. He hadn't. Roughly 4 months after the first arson murder, the predator struck again, this time in Newcastle, near Chatham, the two towns that form today's city of Miramichi. Two young women, Donna and Linda, lived there. On Friday, October 13th, 1989, at about 11 p.m., Linda returned from a night out with a friend. As she approached the door, a man moved out of the darkness, struck her hard, and dragged her inside before shutting the door. Not long after, neighbors reported another fire. Fire crews battered their way in, fought the flames upstairs, and found Donna and Linda, both dead. They had not died of smoke or flame. Their bodies showed severe beating and sexual assault. Crime scene technicians recovered a lock of hair and biological evidence from the victims, sealing samples for DNA testing. The town of Newcastle erupted into action. Police canvassed more than 200 homes, asking if anyone had seen suspicious movement or a stranger lurking. Citizens armed themselves. Licensed guns were legal, heavy sticks, baseball bats, anything they could keep at arm's reach. Streetlights stayed on all night. People formed informal watches and told the police point blank, "If you can't protect us, we'll protect ourselves." The RCMP surged in reinforcements from Ottawa, including emergency response team units and helicopters sweeping the forests. Halloween on October 31st was canceled. The Miramichi stopped sleeping. Around this time, the new DNA laboratory in Ottawa became fully operational. Because Legere already had a serious record, reference material for him was on file. The lab began comparing the new casework to known identifiers. The scientific trail was pointing toward Legere. But before police could make a formal declaration, the killer attacked again. Churches had become 24-hour sanctuaries. Frightened families gathered in the pews at all hours, praying for an end to the violence. Their priest, Father James Smith, was a steadying voice. He reassured them, "We will survive this. Deliverance is near." On November 16th, 1989, around 7 p.m., parishioners waited for Father Smith to arrive for evening prayer. He was never late. After 30 minutes, 2 helpers left to check on him. No answer at the rectory door. They peered through a window toward the kitchen and froze. Blood was everywhere. Police forced entry and found a scene later described as nightmarish. Blood spattered across walls, ceilings, and floors. Father Smith had been tortured, ribs fractured, limbs broken, head beaten, brutalized in nearly every way. Unlike the previous crimes, the killer did not ignite the house. Investigators believed he felt someone nearby and fled before risking discovery. But in fleeing, he made a mistake. He stepped from a slick of blood onto a clean patch of floor, leaving a clear outsole pattern and shoe size. Detectives also realized the priest's car was missing. A search turned it up near a hotel, and beside it, a single shoe, the same make and size as the print inside the kitchen. The net was tightening. About a week later, a taxi driver named Ron was flagged down by a man who claimed he'd missed a train and needed a ride to Moncton. Partway into the trip, the passenger pulled a gun. It was Legere. Ron understood that his odds were bad whether he obeyed or resisted. He chose risk. He suddenly jerked the cab off the road, crashed, and the car rolled. Miraculously, both men survived and scrambled out. A young woman in another car stopped to help. Legere immediately hijacked her at gunpoint, ordered Ron into the back seat, and pressed the weapon to the woman as she drove. When they stopped at a gas station, Legere took the ignition key and went inside to pay for fuel. A grotesque flash of honesty in the middle of a violent spree. The woman whispered to Ron that she had a spare key. They started the car, kept their heads down, and floored it. By the time Legere heard tires shriek and rushed outside, they were streaking away into the night. Legere then hijacked a truck driver, jamming the gun at him and ordering a detour onto a deserted road. But fate had other plans. They rolled straight into a police checkpoint that had standing orders to stop every vehicle. Officers lifted their weapons and shouted commands. Legere left the gun in the cab, opened the door, and stepped down, hands visible. He was taken into custody. The boogeyman of the Miramichi finally caged. For Chatham, Newcastle, and the surrounding communities, the nightmare eased at last. On August 27th, 1991, Allan Legere went on trial. Prosecutors laid out a case built on forensic science, physical evidence, and survivor testimony. Hair recovered from arson murder scenes that matched Legere. Biological evidence/DNA from the assaulted victims, tested by the RCMP Ottawa lab, consistent with Legere's profile and the assaults described. The shoe print in Father Smith's kitchen and the single shoe recovered near his abandoned car. Same pattern, same size, linked back to him. Most devastating of all, the eyewitness and survivor from the first fire. Nina. She took the stand and described the intrusion, the beating, the binding, the sexual assault of Annie, and the arson that followed. Exactly what doctors and fire investigators had concluded from the physical evidence. After roughly 13 hours of deliberation, on November 3, 1991, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder for 4 victims: Annie, Donna, Linda, and Father James Smith, along with the related violent offenses. The sentence under the law at the time: life imprisonment, with parole eligibility only after 25 years. For the Miramichi region, the verdict brought a hard kind of peace. In the end, relentless policing, the courage of survivors and citizens, and the rising power of forensic DNA and trace evidence closed the trap. They called him the Boogeyman. But monsters aren't myths when they walk your streets. This one is no longer free. For the families of Annie, Donna, Linda, and Father James Smith, justice did not erase grief, but it finally ended the long vigil of fear.